the first thing you notice isn't the sound. It's the smell, that acrid, burning stench of diesel exhaust choking the life out of the morning air, mingling with the scent of wet concrete where my grandmother's prize-winning hydrangeas used to breathe color into the world. And then comes the noise, the mechanical grinding of bulldozers tearing into the earth, a sound that replaces the rooster's crow with the cacophony of destruction. I am standing in my driveway, wearing a tailored Navy suit meant for the corridors of power in D.C., but my boots are sinking into the mud of Maple Creek, Ohio, watching in paralyzed horror as a concrete runway slices through the heart of 4 generations of family sacrifice. It is a level of irony that would be funny if it weren't ruining my life, because while I was sitting in a hearing room as the U.S. Secretary of Infrastructure, literally testifying under oath about the vital need to protect America's rural landscapes, the homeowners association of the subdivision next door was paving a private airport over my organic heritage crops, destroying $180,000 worth of produce, knocking down a century-old oak tree because they deemed it a safety hazard, and poisoning the family well my great-grandfather dug in 1924 with toxic construction runoff. But the moment that really twisted the knife, the moment that turned this from a property dispute into a blood feud, was when I confronted the HOA president, Veronica Sterling, and yes, she looks exactly like the villain in a Hallmark movie who tries to shut down the orphanage, as she clicked across my ruined garden in Louboutin heels, handed me a crumpled $50 gift card to a hardware store, and said with a voice dripping in fake syrup, "This should cover your little damages, sweetie," which was. The moment the record scratched, the freeze frame hit, and the universe whispered, "Honey, you just messed with the wrong farmer." Before we get to the legal warfare, let me back up and set the stage so you understand the stakes. My name is Caleb Hawthorne, and I am the 4th generation to bleed and sweat into this 40-acre patch of earth outside Maple Creek, a plot of land cleared by my great-grandfather Silas Sr. in 1890 with nothing but a rusted axe and a stubbornness that runs in the bloodline like iron. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., I still brew my coffee black and strong, standing on the porch to watch the sunrise, because there is something about the crunch of frost-covered gravel under your boots that grounds you, reminding you that no matter how many policy papers you sign in Washington, you are nothing without the dirt beneath your feet. 6 months ago, the president appointed me Secretary of Infrastructure, a fancy title for a guy who knows that potholes are more than just nuisances. They are betrayals of public trust, and while my wife, Elara, runs the most successful farm-to-table bistro in the tri-state area using our crops, and our twins, Leo and Maya, can strip a tractor engine blindfolded, we were living the dream until the sprawl started creeping in. 10 years ago, the developers arrived like locusts, erecting the Gilded Oaks Reserve, a subdivision of McMansions with faux Tudor facades and names like the Buckingham and the Windsor, because apparently, nothing screams Ohio farmland like fake British aristocracy, and leading this charge was Veronica Sterling, a woman who moved here 3 years ago and immediately treated the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. You know the type. She's the kind of person who wears perfume so strong it assaults you from 3 zip codes away, who walks with a rhythmic click-clack-click that sounds like a ticking bomb, and who conducts quality inspections of the neighborhood with the zeal of a dictator searching for dissent. Last April, she showed up at my door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and a lawyer standing behind her like a shadowy familiar, telling me that we had a teensy problem with my unused agricultural land, which was actually just a field in crop rotation, a practice as old as agriculture itself, but according to some buried clause on page 47 of the Gilded Oaks bylaws, underutilized space could be seized for community betterment, which in her warped mind meant an $85,000 special assessment to build a private aviation facility for the neighborhood's elite. When I laughed in her face, asking who in Maple Creek needed a private runway, her mask slipped, revealing the predator underneath, and she snapped that my government position meant I had abandoned my local responsibilities, claiming that real, community members invest in the future, which was a bold statement considering her husband, Judge Archibald Sterling, sat on the local magistrate bench, and her nephew, Preston, handled all the HOA's legal matters, creating a closed loop of corruption that was almost impressive in its audacity. They scheduled the emergency vote for the exact week I was in D.C. testifying on rural broadband, a coincidence that felt about as natural as a plastic plant, and the vote passed 4-1 with only old man Silas, our 80-year-old neighbor and the last honest man in the county, brave enough to vote no. So construction began 48 hours later, starting with the destruction of my greenhouse, a $40,000 sanctuary of climate-controlled glass, housing rare heirloom tomatoes I'd spent 8 years perfecting. The sound of that reinforced glass shattering under the treads of a bulldozer is a sound that still wakes me up at night, a sound like bones breaking, like history being erased. But Veronica wasn't done, because 3 days later, a process server arrived with a cease and desist order thicker than a phone book, filled with legal jargon crafted by her nephew Preston, effectively telling me that if I interfered with authorized community improvements, I would face federal ethics charges, arguing that I couldn't use my position as a cabinet member to influence local disputes. A trap so perfectly designed it left me breathless. If I fought back, I risked my appointment and the president's reputation. If I did nothing, I lost my heritage. The local rag, the Maple Creek Gazette, ran a front-page hit piece the next morning with the headline, "Secretary Puts Hobby Farm Before Public Service," painting me as a swamp creature using taxpayer money to defend my weekend gardening project, completely ignoring the 4,000 tomato plants lying crushed under wet concrete. But here's the thing about growing up on a farm. You learn to spot a sick animal, and you learn to spot a lie. So while Alara stress-baked enough sourdough to feed an army, I started digging into the permits with the obsessive focus of a forensic accountant. The permits were dated 3 days before the HOA vote, meaning the fix was in from the start, and the contractor invoices were being paid to Sterling Horizons LLC, not the HOA General Fund, which meant Veronica wasn't just stealing my land, she was laundering the money through her own shell company. I tried to play by the rules, filing a complaint with the County Planning Commission, reminding them that my farm's usage predated the HOA by 90 years and should be protected by prior non-conforming use laws, essentially the grandfather clause to end all grandfather clauses. But Veronica had insulated herself with so many layers of local corruption that my complaints vanished into the bureaucratic ether. I called in a favor from an old friend, Dr. Amelia Vance at the EPA, asking her if building a runway over an underground stream without an environmental impact statement was standard procedure, and the silence on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know before she said, "Ezra, that's not just illegal, that's spectacularly stupid." Within 2 days, EPA investigators were swarming the property, taking soil samples, and confirming that the construction had disrupted a tributary feeding the Scioto River, carrying construction chemicals into the drinking water of 1,200 families downstream, a violation that carries federal penalties so severe they make tax evasion look like a parking ticket. The town started to fracture, with longtime residents rallying behind us at the diner, where conversations would die the moment a Gilded Oaks resident walked in, replaced by the clinking of silverware and the heavy weight of judgment, while Veronica escalated the intimidation by hiring private security, rent-a-cops, who blocked me from accessing my own well pump house, the one built by my grandfather's hands, forcing Alara to buy inferior commercial produce for her bistro, which broke her heart every single day. Just when I thought we had a foothold, Veronica played her dirtiest card yet. Realizing that the EPA sniffing around was a threat, she decided to bleed me dry, sending a certified letter imposing $500 per day fines for maintaining an agricultural eyesore adjacent to a luxury improvement, referring to my cornfields, the same corn that won blue ribbons at the state fair. And she backdated the fines to the start of construction, hitting me with a $12,000 bill instantly, compounding daily, followed by liens against my property and a cancellation notice from my farm liability insurance provider, who cited aviation hazard proximity as the reason. The irony was thick enough to choke on. Diesel fumes were now a permanent ingredient in our breakfast, Alara's blueberry pancakes tasting faintly of exhaust, and even our old barn cat refused to go outside, hiding under the porch to escape the air that tasted like a refinery. I was being squeezed from every side, financial ruin staring me in the face, my reputation in tatters, and a concrete scar growing across the land I was sworn to protect. But as I watched the sun set through the haze of construction dust, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. Veronica Sterling had declared war on the wrong family. and she had no idea that I was about to turn her little fiefdom into a federal case study. The stress was becoming physical, a tight band of tension wrapped around my chest that never loosened, manifesting in the wheezing cough of my daughter Maya, whose asthma had flared up violently from the constant cloud of silica dust and diesel particulates hanging over our farm like a shroud. Listening to her struggle for breath in the middle of the night, the hiss of her nebulizer cutting through the dark, chipped away at my soul more than any financial loss ever could. While out in the pasture, Leo's prize 4-H sheep were so terrified by the constant rumble of machinery that they stopped eating, pacing the fence line with manic, nervous energy. Alara finally cornered me in the kitchen one Tuesday evening, wielding a wooden spoon like a weapon, her eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion, and told me, "I didn't marry you to become a widow before I'm 50, Caleb, so you either fix this or I'm dragging you out of Washington myself." A threat that carried more weight than any congressional subpoena. Veronica sensed blood in the water and escalated again, holding a community safety meeting where she presented a PowerPoint arguing that my farm equipment was a danger to her runway, demanding I remove my harvester and irrigation pivots, essentially ordering me to stop farming so her illegal planes could land, and the final straw dropped when her crew sliced through our main gas line, forcing an 18-hour evacuation where we huddled in a motel that smelled of stale cigarettes and despair, wondering if our farmhouse would blow up before dawn. When I confronted Veronica about nearly incinerating my family, she shrugged with the casual indifference of a sociopath and called it an act of God, a statement that lit a fire in my gut hot enough to forge steel. She doubled down, leaking my government salary to every Facebook group in the county, framing me as an out-of-touch elite, sparking a petition demanding my resignation that gathered 200 signatures from people who wouldn't know a soybean from a green bean. And a state blogger picked up the story, writing headlines like "Transportation Secretary's War on Community Volunteers," making me sound like a tyrant crushing a neighborhood gardening club. I was pacing the floor at 3 a.m., grinding my teeth, when Salvation knocked on the back door in the form of old man Silas, clutching a shoebox that looked like it had survived the Great Depression, his hands shaking as he set it on the table next to Alara's cold cinnamon rolls, and whispered, "My late wife kept records of everything, Caleb, and I think you need to see what was in the bottom of her closet." Silas's wife had been the county clerk for 3 decades, a woman who treated public records with religious reverence, and inside that box, wrapped in tissue paper like a holy relic, was the document that would change the trajectory of this war. The original 1924 right-of-way deed for the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. My hands trembled as I unfolded the yellowed parchment, the legal language jumping out at me because, in my job, I deal with transportation easements every day, and I knew instantly what I was looking at: a federal transportation easement that doesn't vanish just because the tracks are gone, a legal ghost that haunts the land in perpetuity, protecting the corridor for future national use. Veronica's runway wasn't just on my land. It was sitting directly on top of a dormant federal transportation corridor, which meant she hadn't just violated HOA bylaws or local zoning. She had encroached on federal territory, and as the Secretary of Infrastructure, I had the unique, almost divine authority to enforce those easements to protect interstate commerce. But the map tucked behind the deed was the nuclear option. The easement extended 300 feet from the center line, a swath of jurisdiction that swallowed not just the runway, but 3 of the HOA's swimming pools, 2 tennis courts, and the entire south wing of Veronica's own mansion. Silas leaned back, a grin splitting his weathered face, and dropped the bomb. I heard her on the phone in the Kroger parking lot. Caleb, she knew. Her lawyer told her about the railroad easement years ago, but she gambled that nobody would ever enforce a dormant claim from 1924 against a wealthy subdivision. She had played Russian roulette with the federal government, assuming the gun was empty, never imagining the one man she was tormenting was the guy holding the bullets. We turned the kitchen table into a war room, assembling a team that included Marcus Trent, a reporter with a vendetta against corruption, and Professor Harriet Bloom, a retired constitutional law scholar who looked at the deed and laughed with the giddy excitement of a child on Christmas, explaining that under the federal preemption doctrine, my authority obliterated local laws like a tank rolling over a tricycle. We decided to wait, to let Veronica dig her grave so deep she couldn't climb out. while Marcus traced the money from Sterling Horizons LLC through a maze of shell companies, documenting every kickback and fraudulent assessment. And Alara launched a stealth social media campaign, #SaveHawthorneFarm, that began to turn the tide of public opinion. I hired a surveyor to map the encroachment down to the inch, confirming the runway violated the federal corridor by 180 feet, a violation so flagrant it was practically inviting prosecution, while Dr. Vance's team at the EPA finalized their report on the Clean Water Act violations, preparing fines that would bankrupt a small nation. Veronica, sensing the walls closing and even without knowing about the deed, began to panic, resorting to petty sabotage that was almost comical if it wasn't so dangerous. My electric fences would mysteriously short out, sending my prize bull wandering onto the highway, and my irrigation lines were slashed with surgical precision, leaving diesel-soaked mud in their wake. She even called the USDA with anonymous tips about unsafe practices, sending grim-faced inspectors to comb through my records. But when that failed, she tried to buy me off. She pulled into my driveway in her black SUV, the dust coating her pristine luxury car, and stepped out with a leather folder and a smile that looked like a rictus of desperation, offering me $700,000, $500,000 for the land, $200,000 in consulting fees, to just shut up and go away, a bribe so transparent it was insulting. She didn't know that Alara was standing behind the screen door, phone raised, recording every word of her attempting to bribe a federal official, capturing the moment Veronica Sterling sealed her own fate. The Department of Justice's Public Integrity Section opened a file the next morning, joining the DOT Inspector General and the FBI Financial Crimes Unit, all tracking the patterns of a woman who had run this same scam in 3 other counties, stealing land and crushing homeowners under the guise of community improvement. Judge Archibald Sterling was informed he was a target of the probe, and I watched from my porch as Veronica paced her property line that night, her silhouette frantic against the twilight, unaware that the quiet farmer she tried to bully was about to bring the full weight of the United States government down on her head. The end didn't begin with a whimper. It began with a media hurricane, a coordinated blitz by Veronica's crisis PR team that painted me as a corrupt tyrant, leading to a House Oversight Committee hearing where my name was dragged through the mud by politicians who couldn't find Ohio on a map, causing my blood pressure to spike so high Alara started hiding my medication bottles so I wouldn't count the pills. But the house of cards collapsed when Judge Archibald Sterling, faced with the choice of federal prison or cooperation, recused himself from all cases involving his wife's business dealings, sending a shockwave through the county courthouse that signaled the end of their legal immunity. The DOT Inspector General's report landed on my desk with a thud that echoed like a thunderclap. 47 documented violations of federal law, $12 million in fraudulent assessments, racketeering, environmental crimes, and a conspiracy that read like a crime novel, giving me everything I needed for the final showdown. The town hall meeting at the Maple Creek Community Center was supposed to be Veronica's victory lap, but instead, it was packed to the rafters with 400 angry residents, news crews from CNN and Fox, and attention so thick it tasted like copper and sweat. Veronica arrived late, flanked by security, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal, and when she tried to shut down the meeting by claiming lack of jurisdiction, the crowd turned on her, shouting her down until I stood up, wearing my flannel shirt and work boots, looking not like a secretary, but like a neighbor. I walked to the front, connected my laptop, and projected the 1924 Baltimore and Ohio deed onto the screen, the image massive and undeniable, explaining in a calm, steady voice that federal law protected this corridor and that any structure within it was a violation of interstate commerce protections. I clicked to the survey map showing her runway slicing through the federal zone, and Veronica leaped up, screaming about government overreach and personal vendettas, her composure shattering into a million jagged pieces. But I held up my hand, and the room went deathly silent. "Mrs. Sterling," I said, my voice carrying the weight of the entire Department of Infrastructure. "Under the authority granted by Title 49 of the United States Code, I hereby order the immediate removal of all structures violating Federal Easement B and O, 1924, effectively immediately." The silence hung for a heartbeat before Old Man Silas started a slow clap that swelled into a roar, a standing ovation that shook the floorboards as FBI agents stepped out from the shadows, handcuffs gleaming, and arrested Veronica Sterling on live television for fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. The chant of "Farm, farm, farm" erupted from the crowd as she was led away, a chorus of vindication that felt better than any election victory. And 3 days later, the bulldozers returned, but this time they were tearing up the concrete runway, funded by Veronica's seized assets, restoring the land to the way nature intended. The cleanup took 6 months and cost her estate $2 million. While Veronica traded her mansion for a 6-year sentence in federal prison, her husband was removed from the bench, and her nephew was disbarred, their family empire dissolving into dust. The HOA was disbanded by a unanimous vote, replaced by a voluntary association that actually cared about neighbors, and my farm bounced back with a vitality that felt miraculous. The stream ran clear, Maya's asthma vanished with the clean air, and the heritage tomatoes grew sweeter than ever in the new greenhouse. But the true victory was the legacy. The Hawthorne Amendment passed Congress with bipartisan support, protecting family farms from predatory HOAs nationwide. And our story became a documentary viewed by millions, inspiring a movement of rural resistance. Standing on my porch now, with the smell of autumn leaves replacing the diesel fumes and the silence of the evening broken only by the rustle of cornstalks, I sip my cider and look at Alara, knowing that we didn't just save a farm. We proved that even in a world of power and corruption, a little guy with the truth and a really old piece of paper can still win. So, that's how I turned an illegal airport back into a tomato field. But it makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other Veronicas are out there right now, bulldozing over people's lives because they think no one is watching? And what would you do if they came for your backyard? Tell me your story in the comments, and let's keep fighting the good fight.
And we are at the end of the videos. I hope you had a great time watching it. If you had any feedback or suggestion for the future videos, drop them in the comment below. And don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching and see you next time.